why can't it be? I'm just envisioning that, go back to caveman days, right? And you've got cavemen grunting and trying to communicate things to one another.
Well, can I stop you right there?
Yeah, please do.
I don't believe that there were caveman days where people grunted. I think that language is there at the beginning of man's creation. I mean, if you look at Genesis, it says that God allowed Adam to name the animals. That's language. That's sort of a transcendental category from the beginning.
Okay. All right. Right on. I'm not arguing for the.
I just wanted to make that point empirical. That I don't have a evolutionary view of language. But go ahead.
If language wasn't given to us by God, I mean, how it seems like it could be something that just came out of the nature of living, right? Like in trying to communicate your very basic sense, like needing.
Hold on. Can I stop you real quick? Okay, let's rewind here. So the question was originally about Quine's paper, Two Dogmas of Empiricism. And I remember what you're talking about. Yeah, I did that video where I tried to break down that famous essay for like the first hour and a half. And then you're saying, you're asking questions about language because there's a specific section where Quine is basically critiquing kind of the empiricist, logical, positivist school, who is saying that, in order to save analytic statements, those are just the ones that are true by definition. What does it mean to be true by definition? Well, it's interchangeable with other words that mean the same thing. Okay, so then what does that mean? Well, that means whatever the dictionary says. Well, who decides what that says? Well, people who decide what the definitions of words are. So it becomes a circle. So Quine's point was just that there's no way to separate analytic truths from synthetic truths because, for example, if you're going to define a bed, how are you going to define a bed without talking about actual real-world beds? Right. It just makes no sense. Obviously, the definition is going to require statements about the empirical world, a posteriori truths, etc. So that was the point, was that the analytic synthetic distinction doesn't work as a empiricist enterprise. So with that in mind, what was your question?
To be honest, it's also new to me. I'm not even totally sure what my question is, but the bed thing is interesting because I remember you saying that in the original video, and I was thinking to myself, like, okay, so can you think about that from, let's say you went off into some foreign land where people had no exposure to modern civilization, literally had never seen a bed before. Like,
it's just an example. It wouldn't matter because it wouldn't matter because the principle would apply to their language as well, right? That they have some object and the symbolic grunts or whatever signify that object. So that wouldn't be a defeater for the argument, because the argument is trying to point out a specific thing that empiricists are trying to base their worldview on. And Quine, as an empiricist, is basically saying, guys, let's be honest, this doesn't work. That's all it is. It doesn't mean Quine's a theist. He's not trying to prove God's existence. He's just showing, like David Hume did, that empiricism falls apart. It doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's a great. I think it's all super interesting. I feel like I still get a little lost in the understanding the circularity of it, but that's just my. That's just my lack of education. So I think that is helpful. And I just had one other quick question, if you don't mind. The other thing that...
well, you can ask your question. I'm not trying to misdirect you. It's just, can you, like, what is the question? I'm not understanding what the question is. Like, you're saying, can people get around the objection by pointing to caveman societies or primitive societies? I don't understand how that's an objection to the point.
I think I'm really just trying to piece together. I've just had this Darwinism, like Darwin-focused philosophy, just because that's what I was taught in school, and never really questioned it all that much. And now I've just gotten really tuned into you over the past 5 or 6 months or so, and all of this stuff is so interesting to me. And it's, but honestly, my brain. It isn't that I'm trying to defend
That's
what
fine.
I have been taught.
Right. I welcome you to ask the question.
It's honestly like my brain cannot comprehend what you're talking about half the time.
Okay, so maybe Darwinism isn't the best thing to reference, even though it's kind of tangentially related to this issue. I mean, not every empiricist is necessarily a Darwinian proponent, but 99% of the time they are. So remember, this is more in the domain of philosophy and epistemology. So David Hume, if we think about Hume coming out of the Enlightenment, is the arch skeptic. And the reason that he's useful for people like myself is not because I accept all of David Hume's conclusions or positions, but that he's consistent as an atheist skeptic. So we use his arguments to show atheists and skeptics that they need to be consistent, right? And their consistency leads to no justification for their beliefs. That's why David Hume is useful. So making that point, just to get that out of the way and make that clear. Now, W.V. Quine is a 20th century philosopher who basically repeats some of the arguments that David Hume made, just to reinforce the fact that there's not really a justification for the empiricist school of thought, you could say, which by the 20th century becomes the Vienna Circle. It becomes logical positivism. Logical positivism is kind of the end result of like the materialist, skeptic, atheist, scientism proponent, right? Who wants to say, I'm going to restrict knowledge to sense data. And this presents a lot of epistemological problems for the people who have that school of thought. And so all Quine is doing as a member of that school, like he's not against those guys. He's in that school of thought. He's just simply saying, guys, we have to be honest here and point out that empiricism is actually based on dogmas. Dogmas are not things that are rational, supposedly, right? Dogmas are just givens, right? They're pronounced by the authority of the philosopher or the scientist, right?
Right.
So he's saying that the presuppositions of empiricism aren't actually empirical. They're dogmatic. One of those presuppositions is the distinction between analytic and synthetic statements. For David Hume, now that's the terminology that Kant will use, right? Following Hume. But for David Hume, he calls them relations of ideas and matters of fact. Relations of ideas would be things true by definition, right? All bachelors are unmarried men, right?
Yeah.
Matters of fact would be statements about things in the world, right? The tree is growing and it is green, right? The tree in my yard is green. Do you see the difference between an analytic and a synthetic statement?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a presupposition of Hume and all the empiricists all the way up until the logical positivists, like Carnap. Carnap is the token logical positivist that Quine chooses as a person to critique. And he says, Carnap's attempt to defend the analytic-synthetic distinction, which is fundamental to the enterprise of science, scientism, and empiricism, he's just saying it doesn't work. It's a big question-begging exercise because it's a big circle about how we understand analytic truths. And so he just shows in a series of arguments and examples that you can't actually distinguish analytic from synthetic in this neat and tidy way. Because, for example, how do you talk about the idea of bachelors without talking about men in the world who are bachelors? How do you talk about beds without actually using... I mean, do you think that what happens is that Quine's argument eventually gets down to people who make dictionaries, right? Do you think that a person who makes a dictionary and talks about beds has no experience with beds in the real world?
Right.
It's absurd, yeah. Right? Of course not. But so that's begging the question, right? Because remember, analytic truths can't be truths about matters of fact or things in the world. They're true by definition. So the analytic synthetic distinction is a dogma that breaks down. That's all and so one of the key points of empiricism fails. That's the point.
Yeah, I got you. That's
so
cool.
It doesn't matter if we went to a tribe who had never seen a bed. That's missing the point of the argument. There's nothing. I'm not faulting you for asking the question. I'm just saying that's missing the point of the thrust of Quine's critique, because Quine is critiquing the argument from Carnap, and Carnap is the one saying, Well, what's analytic is what's true by definition. What's true by definition is what the dictionaries say, and what the dictionaries say is what the lexicographers write in it, and what they write in it is what's true by definition. Do you see how that's a circle? That's literally the argument of the paper.
Right. Yeah, that's helpful. I appreciate that. I was thinking, in relation to this, I've been thinking the past few days, especially since you did those two, you were on the fourth hour there of Lord Voldemort the other day. And I was thinking, I feel like I've kind of gotten pulled into this, but I've gotten pulled more so towards the empirical realm of things because of the insanity of the world that we seem to be living in these days, which I think is kind of unfortunate. It's like almost like people need to be going the exact opposite direction, but the powers that be have made things so irrational that, can you see what I mean? How that would almost attract you to the empirical, because you're like, well, God, everything seems so just ludicrous that at least if I'm working in the empirical, there's some sort of North Star there. Does that make any sense?
Well, I mean, let's be clear here. So empirical sense data is not bad or false or wrong. That has a place in anybody's worldview. But that's different from empiricism, which is a school of philosophy and thought coming out of the Enlightenment. Two different things.
That's good. Yeah, thank you. That's good. Good distinction.